Hello. Thank you for being here. I want to talk to you tonight about nothingness. I realize that may sound like a very short topic, like I've chosen to speak at length about the absence of a thing, and you might wonder what there could possibly be to say. But I found, in thinking about nothingness over the past several months, more than is probably healthy, though not in a way that's caused any significant problems, that nothingness is actually very full, that it is one of the fuller subjects available to us, that when you hold it up to the light, it turns out to have a texture and a weight and a particular smell, not unlike the way a room that appears empty still contains the specific quality of air that accumulated there while no one was looking. So, we'll take our time with this, and if you fall asleep, that's fine. That is in some ways the point, or at least one of the points. I'm not entirely sure what all the points are yet. I usually find out as I go. I want to start with a specific moment. Last October, on a Saturday, I drove to the lake about 12 miles east of town. I go there sometimes in autumn because the trees around that lake are mostly birch and maple, and in October they do what birch and maple do in October, which is become almost unreasonably beautiful. I'm not someone who uses the word unreasonably lightly, but there is something about that particular combination of yellow and orange and the low angle of October light that feels like it's trying to make a point, like the world briefly stops being subtle and just says, "Here, look, I made this." I parked in the small gravel lot that has 2 picnic tables and a sign about fish regulations that I have read many times without retaining the information. I walked to the edge of the water, and I stood there. For about 25 minutes, I stood at the edge of the lake and did nothing. No phone, no book. I had brought a thermos of tea, which I didn't open. I just stood at the edge of the lake and looked at the water, which was very still that morning, still enough that the trees were perfectly reflected in it, the upside-down birches as clear and precise as the real ones, the upside-down sky a shade of blue that seemed slightly more considered than the actual sky, as if the lake had made small improvements. And I thought about nothing, or I tried to, and I found, as I think most people find, that thinking about nothing is not really available to us. The mind does not have an off switch, it has a dimmer at best. So I stood there trying to think about nothing, and what I actually thought about was whether the tea was still hot, and whether Gerald, my parents' beagle who passed away in 2014, had liked water, and whether he had. I think he did. I think he liked shallow water particularly, the kind where his feet touched the bottom. And then I thought about the word lacustrine, which means relating to lakes, which I had recently learned and was looking for a place to use. And then I thought about a song we were working on with the 7th grade choir, a simple piece in 3 parts, and I heard, in my head, the second soprano line, the middle voice, the one that no one ever talks about but without which the whole thing collapses. That is what I thought about at the edge of the lake, and none of it was nothing. But somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the tea and Gerald, and the word lacustrine, and the second soprano line, somewhere under all of that, I could feel the nothing, like a floor you don't notice until you sit down on it. I should tell you what I mean by nothingness, because it's a word that can mean several things. There is the nothingness of empty space, the distance between stars, which is not actually empty, but contains particles of gas and light, and old radiation from the beginning of everything, but is empty enough that if you could stand in it, you would feel, I imagine, very small and very cold, and profoundly aware of the difference between yourself and everything else. There is the nothingness of sleep, which is not quite nothing either. There are dreams. There are the small adjustments the body makes, the breath, the slow cycling of whatever the mind processes while you think you're not there. But it feels like nothing, from the inside. You go in and then you come out and there is no experience of the crossing, just the seam. There is the nothingness between notes in music. This is the one I think about most. The rest. In music notation, a rest is a mark that indicates silence, not the absence of music, but a specific, intentional, measured silence. The rest is part of the piece. Without the rests, the music is not more full. It is less. It becomes a wall of sound rather than a structure you can walk through, and there is the nothingness of a room you've just left, which is the one that makes me feel the most peculiar. I live alone. I have lived alone for most of my adult life, in a house that has 3 bedrooms, one of which is a bedroom, one of which is an office where I keep my music and a desk where I sometimes grade papers, and one of which is a room that I'm not entirely sure what to do with. It has a chair in it. The chair is comfortable. Sometimes I sit in it and read. Sometimes I just sit in it. The room is mostly empty. When I leave the house in the morning, for school, or for groceries, or for a walk, or to stand at the edge of a lake for 25 minutes, the house becomes a place where no one is. The rooms continue. The light moves through them as the sun moves, which it does without consulting me. In the afternoon, there is a rectangle of sunlight on the kitchen floor that shifts slowly across the tile, and I am not there to see it, and it happens anyway. I have thought about this a great deal. The room with the chair, while I'm gone, what is it? It is not empty, exactly. It contains the chair, and the particular quality of light in the afternoon, and the accumulated presence of the times I have sat in it, which I believe objects absorb in some way that I cannot verify scientifically but feel to be true, but it is without me, and the absence of a person from a room they often inhabit is a particular kind of nothingness, not blank, not neutral, shaped like the person who left. My mother told me once that after my father died, the hardest thing was not the moments of obvious grief, the funeral, the first holidays, the anniversary. The hardest thing was coming home to a house that had his absence in every room at once. Not that he wasn't there, that the space where he had been was still the exact shape of him. I've thought about that for 4 years. I think nothingness is almost always the shape of something. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge that nothingness is a topic that some very serious people have spent their entire lives thinking about. Philosophers and physicists and certain monks in the mountains of various countries. I am not one of those people. I am a choral music teacher from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and my engagement with nothingness is largely informal. I've read a few books. I've had a few thoughts. I stand at the edge of lakes sometimes and try, unsuccessfully, to think about nothing. I mention this because I don't want you to expect more than I can deliver. But I also think, and I believe this, that informal engagement with large ideas is not without value. That you don't have to be a philosopher to wonder about the nature of emptiness. That wondering, even without conclusions, is a reasonable way to spend an evening. Especially this one. There is a story about a Zen monk, and I'm aware that mentioning a Zen monk is a very predictable thing to do in a discussion of nothingness. But the story is good, and I've decided to include it anyway, who was asked by a student, what was there before the universe began? The monk said nothing. The student waited, and then said, could you elaborate? The monk said nothing again. The student eventually left, presumably confused. But I have heard this story interpreted to mean that the monk was not being evasive. He was answering the question. The answer was the silence. The answer was the demonstration. I like this story because it requires the student to do something difficult, which is to sit with an answer that doesn't feel like one. I am not a Zen monk, and I don't intend to answer your questions with silence. Mostly because this is a monologue, and there aren't questions, and also because I find that kind of thing slightly affected when people who aren't monks do it. But I do think the monk was onto something about the limit of language, about the way some things can only be pointed at. You can describe the direction of nothingness, you can walk toward it, but you can't quite arrive, because arriving requires you to be there, and being there is a form of something. In physics, there is a concept called the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is what you have when you remove everything. Every particle, every photon, every form of matter and energy that can be removed. The quantum vacuum is the emptiest possible thing. It is, by definition, nothing. And yet, and this is the part that keeps me awake at night, in a pleasant way, the quantum vacuum is not nothing. Even in the quantum vacuum, particles appear and disappear spontaneously, blinking in and out of existence in intervals so brief they are measured in units I cannot meaningfully imagine. The universe, at its most fundamental level, cannot tolerate true emptiness. It keeps filling it in. Virtual particles, they're called. Particles that exist for almost no time, that borrow energy from nothing and return it almost immediately. The vacuum is full of them, these brief, impossible things. I find this enormously reassuring. The universe, it seems, has the same problem I have at the edge of the lake. It cannot quite manage true nothingness. It tries, and then something happens anyway. I want to tell you about the pause. In choral music, there is a marking called a fermata. It looks like a small bird's eye, a dot beneath a curved line, and it means hold this note or this rest longer than written. For how long exactly? For as long as feels right. The conductor decides. Sometimes the conductor holds it for 2 beats beyond what you expect. Sometimes 4, sometimes more. The moment of the fermata is interesting. The choir is holding a chord, let's say a quiet chord, a soft landing after something that has been building, and the moment stretches. You breathe inside the note. You listen to the other voices around you and feel the chord as a physical thing, as a warmth that happens between people who are making the same sound at the same time. And you wait. And the conductor's hand is up, and you don't know when it will come down, and the not knowing is part of the music. The best fermatas feel like nothingness without being nothing. They feel like the lake, perfectly still, the trees reflected upside down, the world briefly paused in a way that allows you to see it more clearly than you could when it was moving. I have conducted fermatas where I've held on too long, where the breath becomes difficult and the choir starts to waver. I have conducted fermatas where I've let go too early, where the chord doesn't have time to settle. Finding the right length is something you feel more than calculate. It's somewhere in the body, somewhere between the heart and the sternum. Approximately, I think about the fermata when I think about nothingness, about how the best version of it is not an absence but a presence that doesn't announce itself, a fullness that keeps quiet. You may be getting sleepy. That's good. That's the right direction. If you want, you can close your eyes now. I'll still be here. I'll keep talking. You don't need to follow every word. You can let the words become sound, and the sound become something like weather, and you can be in the weather the way you are in weather, not understanding it exactly, just inside it. I grew up in a house that had a lot of silence in it. Not an uncomfortable silence, not the silence of people who have run out of things to say or who are deliberately not saying things. My parents were simply not loud people. My father read in the evenings, my mother did crosswords. There was a radio in the kitchen that played classical music in the mornings, and in the evenings it was turned off, and the house settled into its quiet the way a body settles into a chair. I grew up thinking this was how houses worked, that the default setting was quiet. I was surprised later when I visited friends whose houses were always on, televisions, music, noise of some kind, conversation as a continuous process, rather than something that happened in specific moments by choice. I did not find those houses bad. I found them interesting. I found them to be a different relationship with silence than I had grown up in. My relationship with silence is, I need it, the way I need sleep and water, and the occasional walk somewhere green. It is not optional. It is maintenance. Without enough silence, I start to feel like a room that's been open too long in summer. A little thick, a little warm. I need to be closed for a while to recover the right temperature. This is not something I have always been good at explaining to other people, but I think you might understand it. There is a word in Japanese that I have been thinking about for several years. The word is ma. It is pronounced as one syllable ma, the same sound as the beginning of mother, or maple, or Margaret, who plays the hammered dulcimer and pays her self-employment tax without resentment and calls her dues a kind of membership. Ma is a difficult word to translate. It refers roughly to negative space, to the pause, the gap, the meaningful interval between things. In Japanese architecture, in Japanese music, in Japanese visual art, the spaces between things are considered as carefully as the things themselves. The silence between notes, the empty room in a house, the distance between two people who are standing close to each other. Ma is not emptiness. Ma is the relationship between things, made visible through the absence between them. When I learned this word, I sat with it for a long time. I felt it illuminate something I'd been trying to understand for years. The idea that the spaces are not wasted, that the pause between the last word and the next one is doing something, that the 25 minutes I stood at the edge of the lake apparently doing nothing were not subtracted from the day but added to it. Ma I have been trying to make more of it, more intentional pauses, more standing at the edge of things, more letting the silence be what it is rather than filling it with something, because silence makes me feel that I should be doing something. I am still learning this. I am not sure it is fully learnable. I think it might be the kind of thing you practice your whole life and get better at but never finish. That seems fine to me. I want to tell you about a student I had about 6 years ago. His name was Oliver, and he was 12, and he was by any measure not interested in choir. He had been placed in choir the way some students get placed in choir, not by choice, but by scheduling. The other electives were full. Choir had space. Oliver arrived on the first day of school carrying a kind of preemptive resentment, the way you carry an umbrella when you're certain it's going to rain. Oliver was a small kid, very still. He sat in the back row of the baritone section, which was the wrong place for him. His voice was still changing, somewhere between a boy's soprano and whatever it was going to become, but he preferred the back, and I let him. For the first several weeks, Oliver barely sang. He moved his mouth. He stood when we stood, he sat when we sat, but very little sound came out. I didn't say anything about this. Around October, the month of unreasonable beauty, the month of standing at the edge of lakes, Oliver started singing, very quietly at first. A tentative sound, testing the air. He had a nice voice, it turned out. A little unsure of itself, like a person walking into a party where they don't know anyone but are willing to try. By December, Oliver was singing, genuinely singing. I never made a moment of it. I didn't say, "Oliver, I notice you're singing now." I didn't praise him in front of the group. I just let it happen, the way you let a shy animal come to you, by being still enough, by not making sudden movements, by trusting that it will find its way if you give it enough quiet to work in. At the end-of-year concert, Oliver sang a 2-bar solo, 8 words, in a song we'd been rehearsing since January. He sang them clearly, in tune, without looking frightened. After the concert, his mother thanked me in the hallway. She said Oliver had been talking about choir all year. She said she hadn't heard him talk about school like that in a long time. I thought about that for many weeks afterward, about what had made the difference, about whether it was the music, or the patience, or the particular quality of silence I tried to maintain in that room, the sense that there was no hurry, that a person could take up as much or as little space as they needed, that the quiet was not pressure but permission. I think Oliver needed the quiet more than he needed the singing. I think the singing was what happened inside the quiet. There is a thought experiment that I return to sometimes, usually late at night or while doing dishes. Imagine that nothing existed, not that the universe was empty of matter. We've established that the quantum vacuum doesn't permit that, but truly nothing. No space, no time, no possibility, no potential, nothing that could become something. Absolute, complete non-being. The thought experiment fails almost immediately, because in order to imagine nothing, you need a mind to imagine it, and a mind is something, and something is not nothing. So the very act of thinking about nothingness produces something which defeats the purpose. This is the problem with nothingness. It refuses to cooperate. Philosophers call this the problem of nothingness, though some philosophers call it by other names, and some philosophers think it's not really a problem at all but a confusion about language. Those philosophers are possibly right, but less interesting to me at 11 in the evening. What I take from this thought experiment, my informal late-night dishes-in-hand version of it, is that existence is, in some sense, irreducible, that the universe cannot get below a certain floor of somethingness, that everything that is came from the smallest possible amount of something, a seed so small it barely deserved the name. And then it kept going, and here we are, stars, lakes, Gerald the Beagle, the second soprano line, the word lacustrine, my father's reading glasses, Oliver singing 8 words in a gymnasium in December. That is an extraordinary amount of something. It seems to me that the right response to this is not astonishment exactly. Astonishment is too loud, too much surface area. The right response is more like the moment after astonishment. The settling, the sitting down, the quiet exhale, the fermata. I should tell you about the drive home from the lake. After the 25 minutes of standing and the failed attempt at thinking about nothing, the T. Gerald, lacustrine, the second sopranos, I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The car was cold. October cold. The kind of cold that doesn't apologize. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat in the cold and looked at the windshield, which was fogged slightly on the inside, and through the fog I could see the parking lot in a way that was blurred and soft, the edges of things uncertain, the two picnic tables indistinct. It occurred to me that this muffled, soft-edged, cold, calm moment was actually quite close to the nothing I'd been trying to find at the edge of the lake. Not nothing, but a close neighbor of it, and not quite here, not quite there. A seam between being somewhere and being somewhere else. I stayed in it for another few minutes. Then I started the engine and drove home. The heater came on slowly, the way it does in older cars. The defroster cleared the windshield. The world sharpened. The road was specific and grey, and the trees alongside it were specific and orange, and everything declared itself again. I was glad to have the heater. I was also glad to have had the cold. It is very late now, or it is the kind of late that feels like it has been late for a while. The specific late where the edges of hours blur into each other, where time does something gentler than usual. I want to talk about sleep. Sleep is the closest most of us get to nothingness. It is not nothing, I said this already, but it is nothing in the way we experience it. You are awake, and then you are not, and then you are again. The in-between has no texture from the inside. You don't experience the transition. You just find yourself on the other side. When I was very small, 4 or 5 years old, I used to be frightened of sleep, not of nightmares, not of the dark, of the nothing of it, of the fact that I would stop, that there would be a version of me who was not experiencing anything, and I couldn't imagine that version of me because imagining requires experiencing, and I couldn't do that while I was that version. My mother sat with me one evening and I told her this, as best as I could at 5. She listened in the way she listened to everything, fully, without hurrying me toward a conclusion. She said, "You've done it every night. Every night, you've gone away and come back. And here you are." That was all she said. I thought about it and decided it was true, and after that I was less frightened of sleep. I'm not sure that logic would hold up to scrutiny. It doesn't address the underlying worry, which is about the continuity of self, which is a genuine philosophical puzzle that I don't think my mother's patient practical answer actually solved. But it didn't need to be solved. It needed to be okay. And she made it okay by pointing at the evidence. Here you are. You went away and came back. Night after night, the nothing gave you back. I think she was teaching me something about trust, about the accumulated proof of ordinary experience. I fell asleep that night, and every night after. There is something that happens to me sometimes when I'm conducting. The choir is singing a soft passage, a pianissimo, a gentle held note, and I am standing in front of them with my hands up, keeping the time very still, very small, just the barest motion to hold them together. And I stop hearing the individual voices, not because they blend badly, but because they blend so well that the boundary between them dissolves. The choir becomes a single thing, a sound-making shape rather than 12 or 20 or 40 individuals. In those moments, I'm not thinking about anything. Not about the music, not about what comes next, not about whether the tenors are going to flatten on the high note they always flatten on. I'm just in the sound, present in it the way you can be present in weather, in a room with a low light, in a car with a fogged window. I don't know if that's nothingness exactly, but it's close to something I don't have a name for, a state of being that is fully occupied and fully empty at the same time. The jar that is full of nothing because it is full of air. After those moments, when the chord resolves and the students look up, I always feel not refreshed exactly, but reset, like a clock that someone has wound, like a room that's been aired out. I've tried to describe this to people. I usually can't find the words. The words I have are approximate, but I believe the experience is real, and I believe many people have versions of it. In sports sometimes, in prayer, in cooking, I've been told, for certain kinds of cooking that require long sustained attention, in driving a familiar route in conditions that require just enough focus that the mind empties itself of everything else. I think these are moments of productive nothingness, of the mind stepping out of its own way. I think they're good for us. I think we should make more room for them. My neighbor, whose name is Dave, mows his lawn in a very specific pattern, diagonal stripes, northwest to southeast, alternating direction with each row. He does this on Saturday mornings from May until October. I can hear the lawnmower from my kitchen. I have watched Dave mow his lawn from my kitchen window for 11 years. Last summer I asked him about the pattern. He told me that his father mowed diagonal stripes, and his grandfather before that, and he just kept doing it because it was how lawns were mowed. Then he paused, a small, unself-conscious pause, and said, "Also, I just like it. There's something nice about having one thing that just goes in a direction and covers the ground, and then you're done." I think about Dave mowing his lawn when I think about nothingness. about the particular emptiness of a task that is simple and physical and requires just enough attention that the mind goes quiet. No decisions to make, no outcomes to worry about. Just the diagonal stripe, southeast to northwest, then northwest to southeast, then southeast again. The lawn gets mowed and something in Dave gets restored. The nothing is doing its work. I want to say something about stars. I have a small telescope. I am not an expert. I know how to find a few things. The Orion Nebula, the Pleiades, the Andromeda Galaxy, which is the furthest thing you can see with the naked eye, and which fills me with a feeling I can't name every time I find it. A feeling that is close to loneliness but warmer. When I look through the telescope at the space between stars, not at the stars themselves, but at the dark between them, I am looking at something that is, by most measures, as close to nothing as anything we can observe. Vast distances, cold, mostly empty. And yet, even in that darkness there are things. Dust clouds that will become stars in 1 billion years. Light from stars that no longer exist, still traveling, still arriving. The faint glow of galaxies too distant to resolve. The dark between the stars is not black. It is a very, very dark blue, or so I've read, and I believe it even though my telescope is not good enough to show me. I find enormous comfort in this, in the fact that even nothing is not quite nothing, that the universe has decided or has simply found, through some irreducible property of physics, that there is always something. That existence insists on itself, at every scale we can observe. I stand in my backyard with my small telescope and I look at the Andromeda Galaxy, which is 2.5 million light-years away, which means I am looking at light that left that galaxy 2.5 million years ago, which means I am looking at the past in the literal sense, not the metaphorical one, and I feel very small and very temporary, and also somehow included. I am part of the something. We all are. Even when we feel like nothing, we are part of the something. We are a shape in the space, a presence that leaves its mark on the room even after we leave it. There is a kind of nothingness that is not peaceful. I want to name it because I think it deserves naming. It is the nothingness of grief, of loss, of the morning after something ends, and you wake up and for half a second you have not yet remembered, and then you remember, and the day opens in front of you like a room that is too large and too cold. It is the nothingness of depression, which is different from sadness. Sadness has content, has a cause you can point to, has a shape. Depression is more like the absence of content, a static, a grey, a room with no windows and no particular reason for being a room. It is the nothingness of boredom that is not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like suffocation, the trapped kind. The kind children feel on long car trips and adults feel in certain meetings, and everyone feels sometimes when they suspect they should be elsewhere but cannot identify where. I don't want to speak only of the peaceful version of nothingness, as if the difficult version doesn't exist. It exists. I have been in it. I think most people have. And I think the difficult version is partly what makes the peaceful version feel like a gift, because we know the difference. We know that emptiness can be a kind of rest, but we also know that it can be a kind of weight. If you are in the difficult version of nothingness tonight, I hope this is a small respite. I hope the sound of my voice, which is quiet and has no urgent content, is a kind of company. I hope the darkness is just darkness and not the other kind, and I hope you sleep. I want to return to the lake for a moment. After I drove home from the lake, after the fogged windshield and the cold car and the heater that came on slowly, I made soup. This is what I do in October. I make soup in a large pot that belonged to my grandmother, a green enamel pot with a small chip on the rim that I have never thought to repair because it seems like it would be dishonest to repair it now, after all these years, as if the chip hadn't happened. I made lentil soup. It takes about 45 minutes. The lentils have to be watched at the beginning, then left alone, then watched again toward the end. It is a task that requires intermittent attention, which I find agreeable. It gives you long pauses in between to stand by the window and look at the yard, which in October has leaves on it that I have not raked and will not rake for another few weeks. The yard full of unraked leaves is a version of nothingness, I think, an in-between state. The trees are done giving, but the yard has not yet been cleared. It is paused. It is between the summer's fullness and the winter's bare honesty. It is exactly where it is. I find it beautiful in a way that's hard to defend to someone who likes a raked yard, but I let it be what it is for a while. I let the leaves lie there in the specific arrangement the wind arranged them, which is not a human arrangement, and has a quality that human arrangements rarely achieve, a kind of rightness without intention. The soup was good. I ate it at the kitchen table, slowly, without reading or looking at my phone, Just eating soup in October, in a house that was warm, in a town that was getting ready for winter the way small towns get ready for winter, quietly, mostly, by simply continuing. I have been trying to think of what nothingness teaches us, not as a lesson. I'm suspicious of the word lesson when applied to large things, because large things don't always want to be lessons. Sometimes they just want to be themselves. But if there's something nothingness offers, some consequence of spending time with it, I think it might be this. Nothingness teaches proportion. When you stand at the edge of something genuinely vast, a lake, a dark sky, a field in winter, the silence of a house in early morning before anything has started, you become very aware of your own size, and that awareness is not diminishing. It is clarifying. It reminds you that you are not as large as you might have assumed, that the problems that feel oceanic are, from the right angle, quite small, that the day you had, which was difficult and complicated and full of noise, is taking place inside a universe that has been here for 13.8 billion years and will continue for much longer than that, with or without your opinion on how Tuesday went. This is not meant to be bleak. It is meant to be a relief. Your Tuesday, in the context of all that space and all that time, is very small and very brief and entirely yours. It belongs to no one else. It happened in you and to you, and it was all you were asked to be responsible for, and tomorrow there will be a new one, and it will be small and brief and yours too. Nothingness in this way makes the something feel more precious, more specific, more like a gift you didn't entirely earn and don't have to. I am going to tell you one more thing. My father, in the last year of his life, he was ill for about 8 months, in the way that people are ill at the end, gradually and then all at once, and then a kind of plateau, and then in that last year he became very interested in nothing. Not philosophically, not the way I'm using the word tonight, in a simpler way. He would sit in his chair by the window, the same chair that has always been there, a brown armchair that has the particular shape of a man who has been sitting in it for decades, and he would look out the window at the yard, for long stretches, an hour sometimes, 2 hours. I visited him on a Sunday in March, the March before he died, and I sat with him in the afternoon, and I watched him watch the yard. The yard had snow in it still, the grey-blue snow of late March that is not pretty like December snow but is doing its best. There were 2 squirrels, a bird feeder that was almost empty. My father watched all of this with the same attention he had brought years earlier to the tax forms, to the receipts in the green metal box, a full, unhurried attention, a man who had decided that this was worth watching. After a while, he said, without turning to look at me, "It's enough, isn't it? Just this?" I said, "Yes." He didn't say what he meant by this. The yard, maybe. The afternoon. The being in a room with someone you love, not needing it to be more than it is. Just this. I think about that a great deal. I think about it when I stand at the edge of lakes, and when I conduct fermatas, and when I sit in my car in cold parking lots, and when I look at the Andromeda galaxy, and when I let the leaves stay on the lawn a little longer than necessary. Just this. The something held lightly inside all that nothing. You're almost asleep. Or maybe you've been asleep for a while, and I've been talking to the room, which is fine. Rooms are good listeners. They've been practicing for a long time. I want to tell you that the nothing is okay. The nothing you're going into, the sleep, the rest, the seam between one day and the next, it's okay. You've done it before. Night after night you've gone away and come back. The nothing has always given you back, rested, more or less ready. Here you are. You went away and came back, and here you are. And tomorrow you'll go away again and come back again. And there's something in that rhythm, that reliable, unremarkable, daily rhythm of consciousness and its absence, that I find one of the most comforting facts available. We are creatures who need to go away regularly and come back. And we do. We just do. The house is quiet. Somewhere outside, if you are somewhere that has them, there might be a few cars going past on a road, or wind, or the sound of a neighbor's house doing whatever houses do at this hour, the tick and settle of walls in the cold, the distant click of a furnace, the refrigerator's low, reliable note. These sounds are not interruptions. They are the texture of the nothing, the proof that nothingness, even at its most generous, always keeps a little something in reserve, like the quantum vacuum full of brief impossible particles, like the lake, perfectly still but holding the trees upside down, like a room that is empty but shaped still, like the person who left. Good night. Go into the nothing gently. It will keep you. It always does.